Okay, here's a quick summary of what I wrote in the email just so that you can kind of see it live. I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing is that you've got to gain a better motor control and connection to what's happening from like the shoulders and upper back, rib cage and pelvis. There needs to be a very intentional connection between the torso throughout your entire range of motion of your squat. So you need to think about, as you're holding that barbell, that lat pull down and that little shrug up so we keep that back tight the whole time. You need to think about the rib cage staying down, and I like to think about the connection of the ribs to the pelvis on the front side of my body. I imagine if there's like a string there, I want to keep that string nice and tight and short. If I let my ribs flare out and my tailbone tuck, that string starts to lengthen. So that engagement through your core on the front side of your body. And if you engage that connection between your ribs and your hips, your pelvis almost naturally comes into that slightly tailbone tucked position. You don't want to scoop the butt completely under, but you definitely don't want to let that tailbone just hang out behind you. So it's slightly underneath your body, and if you keep the rib to hip connection, it usually follows suit to where it should be. Okay, so there's that position of the ribs, the position of the pelvis, and then obviously I know Forrest taught you about that intention through the floor, through your feet. So big toe, pinky toe, heel, really grounding yourself into the floor, finding that little corkscrew activation of the femur so that you feel that torque tension already created at the pelvis. Now what I'm seeing outside of breath, we'll talk about breath in a second, but what I'm seeing from a problematic that could actually be leading, a big problem that could be leading to those back issues is your butt leading the way. So you get down to the depth of your squat, and instead of just coming straight up, right, you want to go up, and then you lead the way with your chest to play catch up, and then you come up. So that's basically changing the shape of your lumbar spine under load. So it's increasing that extension under load, which is what we do not want. So when you get to the bottom of your squat, I want you to think about your shoulders and hips coming up at the same exact time. Right back up to that super stacked position. Okay, so we start stacked, we go down into the squat, and we finish stacked. The whole time the ribs are down, the eyes are looking at something. Just be super intentional about the tension and rigidity that you're creating through your body to feel strong through the movement pattern. Okay, so real quickly about the breath work. So a Valsalva increases inner abdominal pressure in order to stabilize your spine when you're under load and you're doing your movement pattern, which could be a squat, deadlift, anything. But Valsalva is a forced exhale against a closed glottis. So if you close your glottis and try to exhale, that increase in pressure is what's going to help stabilize you through the movement pattern. So you don't have to always Valsalva, but it's good to know how to Valsalva before you try heavy loads. So even if this doesn't feel like you need to Valsalva, I encourage people to practice Valsalvaing so that when you need it, you can use it. Anyway, so I want you to think about, if you've got your rib cage stacked over your pelvis, when you take a big inhale breath, your diaphragm drops down. We want that. That is going to help create some expansion. Okay, so if the diaphragm stays up high, we don't really get to take that as much expansion through the torso as needed to create that that space for that inner abdominal pressure to help stabilize. So what I want you to think about doing is taking a big inhale breath, and then that exhale, that initial short exhale is when you're going to engage that pelvic floor and the low abs up. Then that secondary inhale, and then the forced exhale against the closed glottis, that's what increases that pressure. So I'm sure Forrest went over this with you, but maybe just didn't talk about it exactly as I do. There's lots of ways to coach breathing. There's not one right way to do it. So you got to just basically trial and error what works for you, but don't trial and error during heavy loads. So play around with it at lighter loads. Find what feels good and works for you in terms of being supported, and then go with that. You'll know it's working if you can keep your tension, right? So if you can keep your tension throughout your range of motion, then you've got something good. If all of a sudden you feel that hip that pelvis swaying behind you, your rib cage flaring, if you feel your butt leading up, chances are you've got to lost your brace. So yeah, just focus on more tension and intention through your torso throughout your range of motion of your squat, and then also focus on finding a way to breathe during each rep that's very similar and repeatable, right? Okay, let me know if you have